Day 60. 2 months. Not 60 days as an abstraction. Not 2 months as a milestone to be noted and moved past. 2 months as a lived reality. For a family that has been waking up every single morning for 60 days to the same absence, the same silence, the same unanswered question. 2 months of a daughter going on national television to beg for her mother's return. 2 months of a community tying yellow ribbons to trees outside a house that is empty in a way it was never supposed to be. 2 months of investigators following leads that have not, as of today, produced an arrest. 2 months of a Bitcoin wallet sitting empty. 2 months of a pacemaker that is not reconnected. 2 months since the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona. 2 months since the masked figure appeared on her doorbell camera at 1:47 in the morning. 2 months since her pacemaker went silent at 2:28 a.m. 2 months since her family arrived to find her phone, her purse, her keys, her medication. And no Nancy. 60 days. And tonight, we know more about what went wrong in the first 33 of them than we have known at any point since this investigation began. Because this week, 2 details emerged from inside sources that together paint a picture of an investigation that may have been compromised from its very first hours, not by malice, not by corruption, but by something in some ways more troubling, by inexperience, by institutional failure, by a department that looked at the most high-profile kidnapping case in Arizona history and assigned it to a detective with exactly 2 years of experience in homicide. 2 years. 33 days. And a crime scene that a former sheriff says was corrupted before anyone truly understood what they were looking at. This is forensic disconnect. And this is day 60. Before we go any further, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We are here every single day while this case is active. 2 months in, no arrest, no named suspect, no confirmed proof of life, and new information arriving every single day that makes the picture clearer and harder to look at the same time. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because what is coming? The oath hearing on April 7th, Savannah's return to the Today Show on April 6th, the DNA work that is still being processed, the second crime scene that Cece Moore says almost certainly exists. None of it is over. None of it is resolved. And we will be here for every single development. Now, to understand why Day 60 matters as much as it does, why the 2 revelations at the center of today's coverage are not just interesting details but genuinely significant developments in the picture of this investigation, you need to go back to the very beginning. You need to understand what the first days and weeks of this investigation looked like, what decisions were made, what resources were deployed, and what has now been revealed about the gap between what the public was told and what was actually happening inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Nancy Guthrie was born Nancy Long. She grew up, built a life, and spent decades in Tucson, Arizona, a city she had made her own over the course of a lifetime. She worked at the University of Arizona for years, and she was the kind of person whose influence ran deeper than any formal title could capture. She was someone who got things done not through authority, but through persistence and care and the willingness to show up. When the university threatened to shut down its Poison Information Center due to budget cuts, she did not write letters or send emails. She went door to door. She collected more than 20,000 handwritten signatures, by hand, one conversation at a time, until the pressure was too great to ignore. The center survived. It continues to help people in Tucson to this day. That is who Nancy Guthrie is. She is also the mother of Savannah Guthrie, one of the most recognized faces in American broadcasting, the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, a woman whose face appears on television screens in millions of American homes every morning. That connection between a quiet, private 84-year-old woman living alone in a neighborhood north of Tucson and one of the most famous journalists in the country may be the reason Nancy was targeted. Savannah herself has said she fears it, that someone looked at her fame and her resources and decided that her elderly, vulnerable mother living alone in Arizona was the path to a payday. "I'm so sorry, Mommy," Savannah said through tears in her interview. "I think it's because of me." On the evening of January 31st, 2026, Nancy had dinner with her daughter Annie and son-in-law Tommaso Cioni. Tommaso drove her home. Her garage door opened at 9:48 p.m. and closed 2 minutes later. That is the last confirmed normal moment of Nancy Guthrie's life. What happened after that, in the 4 hours between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m., is still not fully known publicly. She was inside her home. She was presumably asleep or preparing to sleep, and someone, somewhere nearby, was preparing to come for her. At 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, the doorbell camera at the front of the house captured him. A masked figure, armed, carrying what appeared to be a gun holster, wearing gloves, carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack. He tampered with the camera. He covered the lens. The camera went dark. At 2:28 a.m., the app connected to Nancy's pacemaker. The device that monitors her heart and sends a signal to confirm it is functioning went silent. It disconnected from her phone. In 60 days, it is not reconnected. That 41-minute window, from 1:47 to 2:28, is the window in which everything that matters happened inside that house. And the two revelations at the center of today's coverage are directly about that window, about what the scene looked like inside that house during and after those 41 minutes, and about who was responsible for documenting and interpreting what they found. Let's start with the detective. The Pima County Sheriff's Department is not a small agency. It is the law enforcement institution responsible for one of the largest counties in the United States by area. It has a homicide unit, it has detectives, it has institutional knowledge built from decades of cases. And on February 1st, 2026, when it became clear that Nancy Guthrie had not simply gone missing, that this was a crime, that the scene showed evidence of forced abduction, that the FBI needed to be called, that this was going to be the most watched and most scrutinized case the department had ever handled, it assigned a lead detective. That detective had 2 years of experience in homicide. 2 years. That is the detail that journalist Ashleigh Banfield revealed this week on her podcast Drop Dead Serious, citing a law enforcement source. The lead detective assigned to the Nancy Guthrie case, the person responsible for directing the investigative strategy, making calls about evidence collection, coordinating with the FBI, managing the crime scene, and building the case that would eventually need to stand up in a courtroom, had been working homicide cases for 2 years. Banfield was careful in how she framed this. She said, "I'm sure he's perfectly lovely. He may be a very good police officer, and he's got experience as an officer beforehand, just as a homicide detective. 2 years. She was not suggesting the detective was incompetent as a person or even as a police officer generally. She was saying something more specific and more damaging. She was saying that the most complex kidnapping investigation in Arizona history, a case with national media coverage, federal involvement, forensic complexity, a victim with serious medical conditions, ransom notes, cryptocurrency demands, and a suspect who left behind mixed DNA and a carefully staged scene, was assigned to someone who had been working homicide cases for 2 years. Retired Pima County homicide detective Kurt Dabb, who knows this department from the inside, said directly that it would have made a lot of sense to bring back former homicide detectives who were still working in the department in different assignments, people with the specific built-over-years experience that a case like this demands. He said the homicide unit was severely lacking in experience investigating homicides. Not somewhat lacking, not slightly understaffed, severely lacking. Think about what that means in practical terms. In homicide and kidnapping investigations, the first hours are everything. Investigators who have worked dozens or hundreds of cases develop an intuition for what matters and what doesn't, for which detail is significant, which witness is telling the truth, which piece of evidence needs to be collected before it degrades, which question needs to be asked in the first 24 hours before memories fade and scenes get contaminated. That intuition is not something that can be taught in a classroom or learned from a manual. It is built through repetition, through failure, through the specific, grinding experience of working cases that don't resolve cleanly, that require judgment calls in real time, that demand both procedural rigor and investigative instinct simultaneously. 2 years of homicide experience means roughly 2 years of building that intuition. In a department that handles a relatively small number of homicides per year, the Pima County Sheriff's Department covers rural and suburban areas, not a major metropolitan core. 2 years might mean fewer than a dozen cases worked from beginning to end. Against the complexity of what happened at Nancy Guthrie's house, against a suspect who planned carefully and left a deliberately ambiguous scene, against a ransom note situation that required immediate strategic decisions about how the family should respond and what information should be kept from the public. 2 years of experience is not enough. And a retired Pima County homicide detective with 30 years of experience is saying so directly. The task force that finally pulled the investigation together arrived on day 33, 33 days after Nancy was reported missing, 33 days after the blood was found on the front step, 33 days after the doorbell camera was tampered with, 33 days after the flower pots were moved and the back doors were propped open and the pacemaker went silent. That is 33 days during which the investigation was being led by a detective who has since been removed from the case and replaced. Banfield's source confirmed. The original lead detective is no longer part of the task force. The case was reassigned. The task force itself has been moved into the FBI building in Tucson, operating inside federal space with a mix of county and federal personnel. That institutional reorganization, moving the entire operation into FBI infrastructure, is itself a significant development. It suggests that the federal government's role in this investigation has expanded well beyond advisory or supportive. The FBI is not assisting the Pima County Sheriff's Department from the outside. The task force is operating inside the FBI's own building. What was lost in those 33 days? We do not know. No one outside the investigation can say with certainty what decisions were made in the first month, what evidence was collected or missed, what leads were pursued or overlooked, what strategic choices were made by a detective who has now been replaced. But former investigators who know how these cases work are unanimous about one thing. The first 33 days of any kidnapping investigation are the days when everything is possible, when evidence is fresh, when witnesses remember, when the physical trail is still warm, when the perpetrator, however careful, has not yet had time to cover everything. Those days do not come back. What happens in them shapes everything that comes after. Now let's talk about the inside of Nancy Guthrie's home. Because the second major revelation of this week, reported by Brian Enton of News Nation, confirmed by a source close to the investigation, adds a layer of complexity to the physical picture of this crime that has not been publicly grasped. Inside Nancy Guthrie's home, there were no signs of an assault. The interior of the house was clean. Most of the rooms were described as immaculate. That word, immaculate. When people imagine a kidnapping, when they picture the scene that investigators walked into on the morning of February 1st, 2026, they almost certainly do not picture immaculate. They picture disruption. They picture evidence of struggle. They picture the marks that removing someone against their will from a space they have inhabited for years leaves on that space. Overturned furniture, broken objects, blood or other biological material, the physical chaos of a violent crime. None of that was present inside. The rooms were clean. Some were described specifically as immaculate. And the only blood anyone found was outside the house, on the front step, on the porch. This detail does not mean Nancy was not abducted. The physical evidence, the masked figure on the camera, the pacemaker going silent, the blood on the front step, the propped open back doors, all of that still points to exactly what investigators have said since the second day of the case. Nancy Guthrie was taken against her will. She did not leave on her own. Someone came to her home in the middle of the night and took her. But the immaculate interior raises a question that has not been answered. If Nancy was forced out of her home, if she was taken from her bedroom or her living space or wherever she was when he found her, why is the inside of the house clean? Why is there no sign of the physical reality of that encounter? Several possible explanations exist, and none of them are comfortable. The first possibility is that Nancy was incapacitated before she had any opportunity to resist. If the suspect used a chemical agent, some form of sedation, some substance that rendered her unable to struggle or call out before she was fully aware of what was happening, then there would be nothing to disturb. She would have been unconscious or severely impaired. He would have been able to move through the space methodically, carefully, without the kind of physical confrontation that leaves marks. That possibility is consistent with the immaculate rooms. It is also consistent with the level of planning that every other detail of this crime suggests. The second possibility is that Nancy, confronted by an armed man in the middle of the night, chose not to resist. An 84-year-old woman with significant mobility limitations, alone, faced with someone carrying a gun and wearing a mask, the rational response, the survival response, might be compliance. To go with him. To believe in that moment that cooperation was more likely to keep her alive than resistance. If she walked out of that house under duress rather than being physically dragged, the interior would be clean. There would be no struggle to mark the walls or the floors. The third possibility is more troubling and connects directly to what happened at the front door. The blood was outside. If Nancy was somehow injured in the process of being moved out through the front, if she fell, if she was struck, if something happened in the transition from inside to outside, then the interior would be clean and the blood would be where investigators found it, at the threshold, on the step. Former retired Houston Police Department homicide detective Phil Waters offered an important caveat when discussing this detail. He said he does not simply accept what sources describe, until he sees the evidence that backs it up. And he made a point that is essential to hold on to. We do not know what the FBI found inside that house. The FBI processed that scene independently. Their findings have not been disclosed publicly. What sources are describing, the immaculate rooms, the absence of assault signs, reflects what local investigators observed. It does not represent the full picture of what federal forensic examination revealed. There may be evidence inside Nancy Guthrie's home that only federal investigators currently know about, and that evidence may change the picture entirely. That caveat does not eliminate the question. The blood was outside. The source says the inside was immaculate. Whatever the FBI found or did not find, those two facts exist simultaneously and demand to be reconciled. Now, the terrain behind the house. NewsNation used drone footage this week to examine the back of Nancy Guthrie's property, and what that footage showed adds an important physical dimension to everything we know about how the suspect staged this crime and what happened on the night of February 1st. Behind the back gate, the gate the suspect propped open with one of Nancy's flower pots, is not a clear or easy path. It is rough desert land. Brush, cacti, mesquite trees. The terrain of the Sonoran Desert in the dark. In the early hours of February 1st, with no streetlights, no clear path, no easy footing. Former Pima County SWAT Commander Bob Krieger, looking at that drone footage, said, "You can't even see her house necessarily from back there. There's just so much brush and trees. That terrain detail matters more than it might seem, because the suspect staged the back of the house as both an entry and an exit route. He propped open the screen door. He propped open the kitchen door. He propped open the back gate. He created a clear path from the outside of the property, through the gate, through the doors, into the kitchen. All of it staged in advance with Nancy's own flower pots. All of it prepared before he ever arrived at her doorstep. And yet the physical evidence consistently points to a front exit, the blood on the front step. The camera footage at the front of the property, the trajectory that investigators have been working from since the beginning. Why? Why would someone who carefully staged a back exit through two propped doors and a propped gate leave through the front? Krieger's analysis of the terrain behind the house offers one answer. Behind that gate is rough desert. Brush and cacti and trees in the dark, with no lights, potentially carrying or restraining a woman who could barely walk on her best days. That is not a fast or clean escape route. The front of the house, by contrast, leads to a road, to pavement, to wherever a vehicle was waiting. Whatever the risk of the active doorbell camera, which the suspect had already disabled, the front was almost certainly the faster and more practical exit. The suspect may have staged the back as an entry point and always intended to exit through the front. Or he may have entered through the back and realized in the moment that carrying Nancy back through rough desert terrain was not viable. Either way, the drone footage of that landscape behind the house gives us a new and concrete understanding of the physical reality he was working within. And it gives us a clearer picture of why the blood is where it is, and why the back doors were propped open for a route that may not have been used for the exit. Now let's talk about where the investigation currently stands. Not as a narrative, not as a theory, but as honestly and directly as the available information allows. Ashleigh Banfield, who has consistently had the most reliable law enforcement sources of any journalist covering this case, revealed a direct quote from a source inside the investigation. When asked where the investigation stands, the source said 3 words: "We ain't got Banfield said that hearing that hit her hard. She said she had operated throughout the weeks of public silence under an assumption, a reasonable assumption, one that former FBI agents had been reinforcing throughout this coverage, that the silence from law enforcement meant something was happening behind the scenes, that the task force was getting close, that investigators were following a thread that they couldn't discuss publicly, that somewhere in the DNA analysis, somewhere in the genealogy databases, somewhere in the tens of thousands of tips, there was a lead that was being quietly and methodically developed into a case. She said she had used the Brian Kohberger comparison. Nobody knew how close investigators were to Kohberger until the moment they were at his door. She had been reassuring herself with that parallel for weeks. And then she heard, "We ain't got Paul Holes, who was part of the team that solved the Golden State Killer case, pushed back against despair. He reminded Banfield, and everyone listening, that the absence of a public breakthrough is not the same as the absence of progress. He said these cases sometimes take weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. He said the Golden State Killer operated for decades. He said the reality in cases where the offender has put preparation into the crime is that the investigation will not break quickly unless the perpetrator makes a specific identifiable mistake. And he said he believes the perpetrator in the Nancy Guthrie case is actively doing things to prevent himself from being caught. That the care he showed in planning the crime did not disappear once the crime was committed. That this person is careful, and careful people take longer to find. But Holes did not say they cannot be found. He has lived proof that even the most careful, most patient, most evasive criminals can be identified and arrested. The Golden State Killer was careful for 4 decades. The DNA still got him. Sergeant Aaron Cross, president of the Pima County Deputies Organization, confirmed to Banfield that the task force has been physically moved into the FBI building in Tucson, county and federal personnel operating together inside federal infrastructure. He said the investigation has not stalled, that what it is going through is what he called the grind phase, running down every thread, processing every tip, working every database, waiting for the moment when something connects. He said the perpetrator put preparation into this crime, which means it will not be solved fast. But he said the odds favor law enforcement in the end. It is extremely hard to commit the perfect crime. And most crimes, even the most carefully planned, have imperfections somewhere. Former prosecutor Matt Murphy offered the sharpest public assessment of where this investigation stands and where it may go. He said he would bet his bottom dollar that whoever did this is already known to law enforcement. A frequent flyer in the Pima County jail system, someone whose name is in a database, someone who is not a ghost. He called the investigation a clown show. He said the Guthrie family deserves a lot better than what they have received from this department, and he predicted that when this case is eventually solved, as he believes it will be, the perpetrator will turn out to be someone who should have been findable much earlier. That last point connects directly to the rookie detective revelation. If the perpetrator is someone already known to law enforcement, someone with a criminal history, a prior record, a presence in databases, then the failure to identify him in the first 33 days, when the investigation was led by a detective with 2 years of experience, may not be a failure of available information. It may be a failure of institutional knowledge, a failure to know where to look, who to ask, which databases to cross-reference, which patterns to recognize. The kind of failure that experienced investigators learn to avoid precisely because they have made those mistakes before on smaller cases and corrected them. Now let's talk about the new investigative angle that has emerged at day 60. Because Ashleigh Banfield's sources inside the investigation revealed something this week that represents a significant new direction. Contractors, subcontractors, day laborers, workers who may have had access to Nancy Guthrie's home or her neighborhood in the weeks and months before February 1st. The Catalina foothills is the kind of neighborhood where maintenance work is constant. Houses are kept up, landscapes are managed, properties are renovated. There is a steady flow of workers, painters, plumbers, landscapers, handymen, roofers, pool technicians, HVAC contractors, general laborers, who move through the area on a regular basis. People who have legitimate reasons to be in driveways, backyards, patios. People who learn in the course of their work the specific details of specific properties, where the cameras are, how the gates open, what is kept on which patio. Investigators are now actively trying to track down every worker who was coming and going around Nancy Guthrie's property and neighborhood in the period leading up to her abduction. Every contractor, every subcontractor, every day laborer who may have worked on or near that property or in that neighborhood in the weeks and months before February 1st. And the flower pots keep coming back to this angle, because the flower pots on Nancy's back patio, the ones the suspect used to prop open her back doors and her back gate, were specific knowledge, not general knowledge. Not the kind of thing you observe from a street or a sidewalk, specific knowledge of what was on that particular patio, in that particular configuration, of that particular size and weight. Knowledge that comes from having been inside that backyard, having been close enough to those pots to understand that they were there, and that they could be used. If the suspect gained that knowledge through some form of legitimate access to the property, as a worker, as a contractor, as someone with a professional reason to be in that backyard, then the contractor angle is not a new thread. It is the thread that the flower pots have always been pointing toward. Former prosecutor Murphy's prediction about the suspect being a known name in the Pima County system fits naturally within this framework. A person with a criminal history who does day labor or subcontract work, who moves through affluent neighborhoods with tools and a truck and a work order, who has access to backyards and patios and garages, would have both the opportunity to gain the specific knowledge the suspect demonstrates and the prior criminal profile that Murphy believes will eventually match whoever is behind this. None of this is confirmed. No individual has been identified. The contractor investigation is ongoing, but the fact that it has become a specific, active focus of the task force at day 60 tells us something important about where the most experienced investigators now believe the answer lies. Let's talk about the DNA one more time, because however discouraging the source's 3 words were, the DNA remains the most powerful tool working on behalf of this case's eventual resolution. Pima County Sheriff Nanos described it as mixed, genetic material from more than one person, presenting challenges. Fox 10's 2-month special report this week described it as a biological puzzle that could take months to decipher. But former FBI agent Jason Pack, in an exclusive interview with Parade magazine on the 2-month mark, offered a frame that matters. He said, "The DNA recovered from the property that does not match Nancy or anyone in her circle is still one of the biggest threads left to pull. When CODIS and the National DNA Database does not return a hit, investigators turn to forensic genetic genealogy. That science broke the Golden State Killer case. It has cracked cases far colder than this one. Cece Moore has said the same thing for weeks. 300 cases, solved, using this technique. She said if investigators can get a viable profile from the DNA recovered at Nancy's home, the person it belongs to will be identified. Not might be, will be. The technique does not care how long it takes. It builds a family tree from partial genetic matches and narrows it down until only one person fits. It found a killer who had been operating since the 1970s. It will find whoever left DNA in Nancy Guthrie's house on the night of January 31st, 2026. And the second crime scene. Cece Moore said it almost certainly exists, wherever Nancy was taken after her home, a vehicle, a property, a location where Nancy and her abductor existed in the same space after leaving Camino Escalante. Every location like that is a crime scene. Every crime scene has DNA. And when that location is found, and Cece Moore says it will be found, the DNA there will either confirm or clarify the profile being built from the primary scene. And that is when the genealogy databases will have enough to work with. The grind continues. The grind is all this case has right now. The grind and the DNA and the second crime scene and the 40,000 tips and the contractors being tracked and the April 6th return of Savannah Guthrie to the Today Show that will remind tens of millions of Americans that this is not resolved, that Nancy is still out there, that someone knows something, and that the $1 million reward is still waiting for the person who decides to make the call. On April 7th, one day after Savannah returns, Sheriff Chris Nanos will testify under oath before the Pima County Board of Supervisors. A century-old territorial law was invoked to compel him. 8 suspensions between 1979 and 1982. A former sheriff saying he corrupted the crime scene, a deputies union that voted no confidence, a rookie detective who led this investigation for 33 days, a task force that took a month to assemble, and 3 words from inside the investigation that no one wanted to hear. We ain't got and still, the DNA is in a laboratory. The second crime scene exists somewhere. The contractors are being tracked. The genealogy databases are being searched. The tips are being processed. Paul Holes helped catch a killer who operated for 4 decades. He knows that the grind eventually ends. He knows that the DNA does not give up. And he knows that the absence of a public breakthrough today does not mean the absence of a breakthrough tomorrow. Day 60, 2 months. A rookie detective. An immaculate house. Rough terrain behind a flower pot propped gate. Contractors being tracked. A source who said we ain't got and the Golden State Killer's investigator saying, the science always catches up. It just takes the time it takes. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old, 5 feet tall, silver hair, blue eyes. She tended flower pots on her back patio that someone turned into evidence. She raised 3 children alone after their father died of cancer when Savannah was 16 years old. She went door to door and collected 20,000 handwritten signatures to save a program that helped her community. She showed her daughter, by everything she ever did and everything she ever was, how to keep going when the ground falls out from underneath you. She deserves to come home, or to be found, or at the very least, to be known, by everyone who watches this video, by everyone who follows this case. Not as a missing persons case, not as a news story, not as a headline, but as a full human being. A woman who loved her family and her faith and her community and the flower pots on her back patio. A woman who deserves justice. 2 months in, day 60, still waiting. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, please contact the FBI immediately. The number is 1-800-CALL-FBI. That is 1-800-225-5324. You can submit tips at tips.fbi.gov. You can call the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. The combined reward from the Guthrie family and the FBI is over $1 million. Tips are completely anonymous. No names required. One phone call. One detail. That is all it takes to change everything. Hit the like button if this case matters to you. Subscribe if you haven't already. We are here every single day until this is resolved. Drop a comment with your reaction to the rookie detective revelation, to the immaculate interior, to the 3 words from inside the investigation. We read every single comment, and the conversation in these comments has been some of the most thoughtful and serious engagement I have seen on any case. We will be back tomorrow for day 61, because Nancy Guthrie deserves to have people paying attention. 2 months in, every single day, until she comes home.